once you really have an understanding of somebody else's life, and all of the complexities of it, it changes so much of that kind of sterile, hard line religion.
Hey, welcome to the Overflow Podcast. This is a podcast on a mission to discover how you and I can live a life of abundance, full to overflowing. In this third season, we're exploring the inspirational and personal stories of some friends and how they have seen God transform their lives and bring them to the point of overflow. This is episode 22. My name is Karl Lindsay, and I'm joined by my friend and co-host, Philip Milosavljevic.
Karl Lindsay, good to see you, brother.
How's it going?
Man, doing really well. I happened to actually bump into a few people this week who, I got to tell you, they were ecstatic about the season past, and one of the group was talking about the season this last episode actually that we had with Chantel and with Benjamin Lundquist. I just got to tell you, so the one group is actually starting at season 1 and they're making their way through.
There's like a group of them doing this.
Yeah,
awesome.
So there's like this group of girls who said, hey, we loved what we heard in season 1. Let's just start at the beginning. So they've as a group dedicated to listening to each episode together and talking about it. So they got to Jennifer Schwerzer's codependency episode and they were in awe. They just said, this is exactly what I need to hear right now. They're going through relationship issues and trying to kind of understand how, as a woman of God, do I take my stand in some way in life and not find a toxic relationship where there's this negative intimacy that we're sharing. So they were really impacted. They're excited for what's to come. And I was just telling them, keep listening.
Yeah, that's good.
And
a reminder for groups like that, we have the reflection guide, which has a bunch of questions. So if you're listening with a group of friends, you can come back to that episode and go through the questions and discuss it together.
And you find that on our website.
That's right, choosetooverflow.com.
Yeah. And the other guy is someone I've been mentoring for a long time, and he happened to just stumble upon the episodes, and he was listening to Chantel the week before and was just like, man, that spoke to me. And then he got to Ben's episode last week. If you haven't listened to that, get to it. And he just said, God just really gave me a word that I needed in this season. He's kind of in a space of transition in his life. And so I'm really excited for these last seasons that we've had, and we are so stoked for where we're going. So stick with us, friends. This is going to be a fun ride.
Yeah, we just started our conversation planning season 4. So ideas still to come there. But before we get into today's conversation, Benjamin Lundquist told me just the other day that he has a brand new PDF on leading yourself well. It's going to be available sometime this week. He didn't say exactly when, but you'll be able to find it from his Instagram bio link. So this episode's dropping on Monday, so go give him a follow. If it's not there just yet, check again tomorrow, or just watch out for his post. I'm sure he'll announce it when it's ready. So that's going to be something to look out for, leading yourself well.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to hearing that.
Yeah. So I want to make sure everyone's catching the progression in the stories of this season, right? We've got God meeting us and redeeming us with his grace. And then we find our value like Chantel was talking about. And it's from this frame of mind that we're talking about today with Kaleb Eisele, when Jesus calls us to love our neighbor.
And so in this episode, you're going to catch his story, but you're also going to find out what he does. Just tell us a little bit about Kaleb.
So Kaleb is a guy up in Portland, Oregon, who makes a living by fostering a sense of community through storytelling. You may have seen his work on the Humans of Adventism page on social media. But we wanted to talk to him today about the importance of listening, because, Jesus called us to love our neighbor, but he kind of extended that beyond those who we know. He said, okay, love those who are unlovable, even love your enemy. And so that's kind of where Kaleb comes in, is something he's been really intentional about, is just learning to listen. Learning to listen to those who he has no familiarity with at all.
And that is so important in a generation and time when people seem to have very little time to listen or desire to listen. And yet, you might be missing out on one of the biggest things you could do.
Mm-hmm.
So why don't we listen to this interview that Karl had with Kaleb.
Kaleb, welcome to the Overflow podcast. Thanks for coming on.
Hey, thank you for having me. Yeah, it's good to be here.
Yeah, I don't know if this fits, but I think you may fit the definition of being a creative social entrepreneur. I don't know if that has ever been applied to you before.
Yeah, I think so. I think so a couple times.
Yeah. I don't know if you guys are familiar with his name. Kaleb is the founder of the Humans of Adventism brand, under which he and Justin Koo just released a documentary series. So we'll talk about that in a bit. Kaleb also does some work as a storyteller for the Seventh-day Adventist Church in Oregon. The main reason we want to talk to Kaleb today is because he is a human who does his best to see the humanity in others. And so, Kaleb, I want to say thank you for that. I wish we were all able to do that more often. Glad you're here.
Yeah, definitely. I think this is such a great topic for anybody because you don't need an education. You don't need money. You don't have to be perfect in your religious beliefs or political beliefs to start making the world better for other people.
Yeah. Yep, love that. So what we talk about on this podcast is how we can have an overflowing life. So I want to ask you, when you hear the idea of an overflowing life, what kind of thing comes to mind?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think only in the past couple of years could I really talk about this place of overflow where I just feel like the blessings in my life have been so far beyond what I expected them to be ever.
That. Yeah.
That I truly am in this position right now of giving away some of that blessing, like as much as I can, finding ways to implement and put it into other people's lives. For so much of my life, especially early on, we were very poor, and early in my marriage, I experienced that again, where not only were we very poor, but also very overworked.
Okay.
And so there wasn't a lot to give. I actually was a person looking back that really needed other people to kind of minister to me.
To pour into you,
yeah. And for a long time I didn't feel that I was really getting that from my community, my church. I felt very kind of alone and sucked dry. But in the past couple of years, I've experienced the exact opposite, where I really feel like God has given me far, far more than I expected to have ever in my whole life, and especially in my late 20s now.
Okay.
So that's what I think of.
Yeah, no, that's good. Take us through that transition. As I think I told you, this season's a season full of stories. So what are the stories that you started off being in the, like you said, in a poor family, and then you got married, and now you're moving to where you are now? How did that journey go?
Yeah, so one of my favorite principles, both in life and spirituality, is that kind of the little things that you do grow into big things over time.
Right.
Kind of this idea of being faithful in the small. And this is something that I saw in my dad. My dad, he could hardly read by the time he graduated high school. He had grown up in a family where he was pulled in and out of school every 6 months, moved to different states. Mostly his family valued working outside with the family over his education.
Yep.
And so I saw him, my parents were very young when I was born. I saw him try to make something of the world. Just every single day, invest in a new relationship, invest in a new project, something. And he was the kind of guy who would get up at 4:00 in the morning and he would be working until 10:00 at night. Just would not give up that there was some way for him to carve out space in the world. And while, I have my own kind of issues with workaholism and that kind of thing, one of the principles that I saw in him was just plant seeds and pick from what grows. Live your life finding every opportunity to sow into relationships, sow into new skill, something. And you don't always have to have this grand end goal to start things, and then kind of go along with what happens. So that's something that I took from kind of my younger life. Then I myself got married at 20 years old. My wife was 18. And
Wow.
we really were kind of put out into the world where we had to drop out of college because we couldn't afford it. We had to figure out life. And so early on, I started looking for ways to do this, to kind of plant seeds wherever I was. And not a lot of people really hear this side of my story, but before I ever really got into journalism, Humans of Adventism, that kind of thing, I was already doing this kind of thing in my community. And how that happened was I started getting to know, I was living in Charleston, South Carolina.
Okay.
And I started meeting musicians. I started meeting actors. I started meeting artists of all these different kinds that would, for example, I would meet some when I worked as a waiter, right? This was a common job for them to do.
Yep.
And then kind of on the weekends go and work in the film industry or, play concerts or whatever. But I'm talking about people who had never released something on iTunes, people who had maybe 5 or 6 shows, like very early on.
Yeah.
And I remember just getting to know them and thinking it was so cool that they wanted to try something, that they believed in what they were doing. And so quickly I became the person who, if they're having a show and 6 or 7 people are there, I'm one of those 6 or 7 people.
That's good.
If they release their first CD, I'm the person paying full price for that CD or wearing their shirt.
Yeah.
And so I was very actively involved with people, and it didn't matter if, I expected their first early projects were going to be like first early projects. I didn't expect them to be, billboard selling people from the beginning. I just thought it was cool that they had poured their heart and soul into something, and there was a physical representation of that. And I wanted to have it because I thought that they were valuable and special.
Yeah, no, that's good.
And so for several years, I ended up starting a blog and starting to do interviews with them. And for so many people, I was their first interview ever. I mean, I would just go and sit in their garage with them where they were practicing or wherever it was and talk to them just to give them some kind of validation, some kind of encouragement and support. And it made me so sad because coming from the Midwest, I didn't know people like this. This was my first exposure to people in any kind of entertainment. And so I always assumed people made more money than they did. And once I started getting to know people, there were people who were literally sleeping in their car. There were people who were still living with their parents because that was the easiest way to pay their bills. There were people living in houses with 10 or 11 other people just to try to create that opportunity for them to spend less time on an hourly job and more time doing their craft.
In some way, they're doing the similar thing to like your dad was, just planting seeds as many as they can.
Yeah. And I just admired the dedication that they had to it, where they would spend hundreds of hours and make $30, just the return was not a great one. And so that led to further, when I went back to college, I decided to work for a newspaper.
Okay.
Covering music. I worked in the music department.
Yep. Did
over 100 little interviews with my name at the bottom on the in this newspaper for free as an internship. And it was really when I came back to church. I had left the church for.
So you grew up in the church, and then you kind of had a hiatus.
Oh yeah. I was very involved growing up. But I just kind of came to this point where I felt like attending a local church did not draw me closer to God.
Okay.
In fact, I thought it was an obstacle to actually getting involved in my community, because here they were having sermons and they were having children's choir. Great. But how does that help the person who can't pay their light bill? How does that help the person struggling with thoughts of suicide? How does that help the person my mentality was very community driven outside of religious spaces.
Yep.
And my question was always, what are we doing for them? We're in this building. Why doesn't it it show anything in the lives around me? Why doesn't it translate into, like, when I hear that there's a church, I'm relieved? No, people say, like, why does that matter to me?
Yeah.
And that was really sad. So as I'm coming back to church, I have this kind of going around in my head, like, man, how do we translate this community driven spirit? How do we translate this, like, down to earth? People's experiences matter and they need to be seen and heard. Like, this ministry of presence, this ministry of listening. How do we do that? And I had been following this page, Humans of New York.
Yes. Yep.
In college. And it taught me so much about myself, because I did not grow up in a diverse community. I very much thought that my version of religion was the right one, that everybody else was kind of wrong or dumb. Mm. And as I read these stories, I was hit with how little I knew, how different my first impression was in reading about somebody. When I saw them at first, my reaction was very judgmental very often.
Okay, yeah.
And yet when I read their story, I thought, I was totally wrong about this person. I don't know anything about their life. Yeah. Everything that I assumed about them is very different than what I'm reading. Mm. And so that's where that heart came from. That's where that spark came from, is all these invisible walls that we have over races, or between races, and that trauma and tension, between genders, especially in the church, in how we've treated women. And then further, which I thought would get me kicked out of the church, is sexuality. There was no room in my growing up experience to truly befriend and love and care for, in a daily way, my LGBT friends and loved ones and community members. And that broke my heart. And so, I kind of decided that I was going to invest my life into this, whether my church would support it or not. Mm. I knew that my community would. I knew that the individual people around me would. But I didn't know whether this was going to lead to me, being forcibly removed from the church.
Yeah.
I didn't know, but I was committed to doing it anyway.
Mm. That's good. Have you heard the word sonder? Sonder?
I have not.
Apparently it's a new made up word. Hopefully one day we'll make the real dictionary. But right now the definition is, I think, what you went through with the Humans in New York page. It's the realization that each random passerby is living a life as vivid and complex as your own.
Yes.
And I'd heard that recently, and I was just like, yeah, that's what this is about. Because every now and then we're like, that's not just a random person driving a car. They have their own things they're going through.
Yeah.
So the Humans of Adventism page has grown in popularity. And I think our culture is having that similar realization of that sonder idea. So people are really resonating. What kind of experience have you received from, or feedback have you received from the culture, the Adventist culture and community?
The most meaningful feedback comes in two forms for me. Number one, I have to mention people who have no exposure to Adventism, or did not grow up Seventh-day Adventist, really don't know a whole lot about it, but are drawn to this page because it's relatable anyway. And I think because we're speaking to the human experience through Adventists, but the human experience, and intentionally that way, there are subjects being covered that other people haven't gotten to talk about either. When you talk about somebody who survived a suicide attempt, for example, that pulls on the heartstrings, that draws us together and bonds us, because there are Adventists who experience that, there are Muslims who experience that, there are atheists, and they're still looking for a deep connection to people who can relate.
Yeah.
And so feedback that says, this is the first religious page I've ever followed that I can truly relate to. Or this is the first religious page I've ever followed that's not intimidating to me or hostile to me. That is where I feel like we're doing something right.
Yep.
The others
Bridges.
that are, yeah, the others that are really meaningful to me are people who grew up in the Seventh-day Adventist church that, like me, have not been exposed to a lot outside their specific context. They don't know that there are other kind of thoughts within the church or practices within the church or even worship styles and things like this. They haven't had a real good way of getting that exposure.
Okay.
If you think about how would you?
Yeah.
Aside from the internet, do you drive to a new state? When you get to the new state, how do you find a church that is different than yours, a community that's different than yours? Those kinds of experiences you can't just kind of decide to do. You have to kind of find a facilitator, a catalyst to bring you into that exposure.
No, that's good. Yeah.
And so getting feedback that's what's happening, that people are given hope that if their experience is very negative or very toxic, that is not representative of what everyone else is kind of experiencing. There are all these different pockets of people and ways it can work and ways that people can really connect with.
That's good. So tell us a little bit about the new documentary series. You released that not that long ago. I know it was on your heart to make something like this for a long time. So how has that impacted your own story? Tell us a little bit about that and the connection there.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this, and I'm so excited I got to do it with my friend Justin Koo. A little background on that: Justin is somebody who kind of clears the way for other creative people. If you are to look online, you'll see that he has a bunch of YouTube videos. Great. If you are to see what he does in person, he is the person who will go and find people who are willing to fund things. He is the person who will go to somebody who's starting something and say, hey, do you want to do this full time? If so, how can I help you make that happen? I remember some of our earliest interactions were just him saying, hey, do you need any videos? We're here together. Let's do some, no charge. Let me just help you create this building block. And so to be able to say, hey, thank you for your involvement in my life. The current place that I live, Portland, Oregon, is partly thanks to his involvement in my life and advocacy.
Yep.
And so to be able to say, hey, we have this big budget project and I want you to be the videographer for it. Thank you. I love your work. I love your vision and your friendship. So this was shot with a 2-person team. Yep. I as the interviewer, Justin on the cameras, and we were approved for this project just maybe a month before COVID happened. So we got a solid week of 13, 14 interviews here in the Pacific Northwest. And then all of a sudden travel is restricted. People don't feel safe meeting. We don't feel safe meeting, all of these difficulties. But throughout the rest of the year, we found, we can go here, we can talk with one person from a safe distance. We can go here, talk with another person from a safe distance. And slowly over an entire year, we're able to figure out how to do the rest of this series. And ended up doing over 40 interviews. So each episode features between 3 and 6 Seventh-day Adventists, all coming from a different angle to talk about one subject.
Yep.
COVID-19 ended up being an episode that we didn't know we could plan for, But as this is happening, we're meeting people who had to get married and none of their family could come, or had to figure out how to help feed the homeless in their community because the community centers were literally closing their doors.
Yeah.
That people relied on. All these crazy stories were coming out, and so we thought, you have to cover this as it's happening with the people who are living it. So the Humans of Adventism documentary is interesting because a lot of Seventh-day Adventist media is so highly theological,
Yep.
and this is intentionally not.
Right.
So a lot of times people within my denomination don't know what to do with something like that, because I'm not a pastor. I'm not making a theological point necessarily, except that taking the time to listen to people and to sit with them and to really take in their story changes how we approach theology. It changes how we approach faith and how we do church. Because you can get up and preach about community all you want, but if all you do is Bible study, if all you do is traditional evangelism, and you're not really involved with people's lives, there's a flattening that happens with your words. There's a genericness that comes to your conversations about community because you're not actually doing it.
Yeah, right. So the stories don't necessarily have a moral as much as it is just beneficial to me to listen to their story.
Yeah, it's a training, and I don't know that people will know that it's a training.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to hide it, but it is. This is something that will open people's eyes to the complexity of humanity and the human story. Because once you really have an understanding of somebody else's life, and all of the complexities of it, it changes so much of that kind of sterile, hard line religion, because you see, okay, the most loving thing in this person's life is different than it is in somebody else's life. The most Christ-like way for them to live in their situation is pretty different from this other person's.
Yeah. So let's get practical a little bit.
Sure.
On this podcast, as I've said at the beginning, we're on a journey to discover how we can live a more overflowing life. So last night I watched episode 3 on the series that you're talking about, and it's called Legacy. And one of the people on there was sharing about, she was talking about people who are good at doing people. And I really love that idea. And by that, she meant that there are some who really have this gift of seeing and interacting with others in a beautiful way. And so my question is, like, is that something that can be learned? Is that a gift that some people have and that maybe some of us will just never learn ourselves? Or how do we learn that? Because I think what you're saying is you're trying to teach people that. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, I think that every single person can do this, but it looks different. You know, people really don't believe me when I say this, but it's true. I am an introverted person who's lived through serious psychological trauma. I was very shy. I was very reserved. And yet my job is literally to interact with people every single week. This is what my job is based on now, and my ministry is based on. So can you learn it? Yes. Will it always look the same? No. There are people who they're going to have to apply this to 2 or 3 people in their life, and that's good enough, because that's the best they can do. And then you have other people who are deeply connected and involved with lots of people that are going to apply this on a grand scale to hundreds of people they meet. You know, the concept, though, is changing our posture. When we approach another human being, there is something fundamentally different about how we need to approach them in order to make them feel seen and heard and loved. And part of that is just being intentional and thinking that you're doing that. You know, thinking like, as I approach this person, how am I going to value what they're saying over what I want to say? How am I going to actually signal to them that I am taking in their presence, their story, their opinions? Because a lot of times we're very self-driven. We're very wait for the person to stop talking so I can make my point so they can hear me. We want to be heard, and we want to be recognized, and we want to be seen just like they do. And we think the way to do that is to interject our stuff and hope somebody thinks it's cool. Very often it has the opposite effect, where both parties buckle down on saying, like, I'm really trying to make my point. I'm really trying to be the one who's heard. I'm really trying to add what I can to this conversation. And we all walk away unsatisfied. My hope is that we can change our posture to I'm going to be the receptacle for you. I am going to be the safe place for you to share your life, to share your opinions. And the natural result is that most people return the favor. They're so grateful that you've taken that time. And they say, oh, I realize I've been talking a long time. What about you? How do you feel about this?
Yeah.
When someone gives to you, our natural response often is to give back. And so it's a much healthier way of dialogue where each person actually leaves feeling fulfilled, feeling seen, feeling heard.
Yeah.
So having that in your mind is step one. I'm going to be intentional about listening to this person. But step two is practice.
Yeah.
You're not going to be good at it, especially for my extroverted friends who struggle with listening, who struggle with getting bored and zoning out and jumping into the next thing. It's going to take more work. It is, but that's everything that you want to get better at. I think one other thing that I would say is important is just taking the attitude that you don't know. That you don't know how their life works, that you don't know how this other person is processing and dealing with things, and that there is a whole world of dynamics and factors that you do not know because you're not the person living their life.
Yeah, right.
And they're working within those stresses and relationships and struggles. So just being patient and being aware that you know less than you think you do is really, really important.
Yeah. Like you said there, you're aiming to see them and hear them and love them.
Yes.
There's this idea that I think is super important when we come to this idea of loving others. And I think it's critical that we make room in our lives for unfamiliar faces and unfamiliar stories. So how do you go about finding the common ground? How do you find common ground when meeting new people?
Yeah. It's funny how I started breaking down these barriers was I started putting myself in really uncomfortable places. So an example, I would put myself in churches where I was the only white person.
Okay.
And I would go through the service. I would talk to the people there. I would just say like, I want to get to know you. I want to learn about, I've never experienced this thing. Or, I tell people like, if put yourself in a space where you're the only straight person, because it challenges so much. When you see people who are actually free in their own environments, instead of adapting themselves to yours, there's something so different about that. If you are a certain strongly one way politically, start following like groups and news and conversations where you're the only person who thinks like you.
Yeah.
Because you get exposed to how other people form their opinions and their brains.
Yeah. It's not about arguing with them. It's just like listening.
Yeah. But have that true desire to understand them. You don't have to land in the same place or kind of like mold your brain exactly to theirs to grow your empathy, to grow your understanding. And so I think that's a good way to train it. I really believe in the existence of power dynamics. So I, as a straight white American male, I have a certain amount of social sway.
Yeah.
When I try to do things, my efforts are kind of boosted by these things. And so I guess one variation on this I would say is the more social power you have, the more privilege you have, the more responsibility you have to listen.
Yeah.
And I want to make this clear, and I don't usually remember to mention this, but I believe there's more responsibility on people with privilege to do what I'm saying than there is for someone who is actively oppressed, actively harmed, actively, being told to be the listener and not to speak. My message is not necessarily for them in the same way. I'm actually trying to create space for their voice to carry much more. I'm trying to create space for them to be listened to. So I would love to see people listened to more that aren't. And I think that's part of the heart behind Humans of Adventism is we really need more opportunity to hear from people who are who are more regularly silenced.
Yeah. That's good. So when we live from a place of abundance, when we're living from, as we talk about on the show, from overflow, it often has a huge impact on our personal relationships. So in your life, how has loving your neighbor, like we've talked about, and listening to your neighbor changed your personal relationships?
It's changed my very personality. If you were to find me, 17, 18 years old, you would find me in heated arguments often. I was very opinionated, very arrogant, and I just wanted to make people see what I saw. I just wanted to get them to agree with me because I thought I was smart. I thought I had the right opinions. And that was very damaging.
Yeah.
Especially because I did not grow up in a diverse area. I'd been told about, the rest of the world, all these other demographics of people and religions and races. And for me to have an arrogant view where I was telling them about their own life and their own beliefs and their own, cultures,
Yep.
Incredibly damaging. And in my adult life, I've actually had to go back and make serious apologies and not just say, I'm sorry and move on, but actually live in a way that says, I have truly repented of this. I am going to now be an advocate for people. I'm actually going to make room constantly for my own mind to learn and listen and just approach people differently. My relationship with my wife is different. My relationship with my siblings and parents are very different because I'm no longer pushing things on them. I'm no longer pushing my opinion or trying to, drive them into a certain way of life that I think is best.
Yeah.
Instead, I am taking in, I am processing, I am listening, I'm looking for ways to help and looking for ways to add value to their life. And not because I think I have it and I'm going to give it to them, but I'm going to listen for what they need and I'm going to try to do that.
Yeah, no, I love that. Just allowing the love that you have received from God to overflow through to them. That's good. Yeah. So I want to give you a chance to leave us with a couple of questions, hopefully that will reverberate around our heads this week. What should we be thinking about as it relates to this topic?
Number one question I would ask is, who are you afraid of? And not coming from a place of trauma, but coming from a place of ignorance.
Right.
Think very honestly about what groups of people you haven't had a lot of exposure to. And now think about your attitude toward them.
Yeah.
A lot of times we are afraid and uncomfortable with people that we don't know a lot about. And I think that intentionally taking the time to explore and listen and learn from different cultures, different groups of people, not only will make you less afraid, but you'll actually start to see and understand why different people act and process the world in a different way. There are reasons.
Yeah.
As human beings, there are no groups that are smarter than the others, only reacting to different pressures and different kind of realities. Our realities are formed by the information we're given and the voices that are pouring into our lives. So I firmly believe that people in, any different situation are going to be formed by those pressures. So understanding that and saying, I'm not a morally better person. I just have this information which guides me to this, and they may not.
Yeah.
And they may have information that I don't have. Usually that's definitely going to be true. So I would say, who are you afraid of? And number two, how do people react to me in conversation and in life? Does it seem like they go away hurt after a conversation? Does it seem like they go away angry? Do they seem guarded around me? Because there are signs in other people, aside from just what they say, that we are actually damaging them, that we are hurtful to them.
Yep.
And when you start seeing people trust you, when you start seeing people feel safe around you, like they can be different from you and it's still going to be okay. When you start feeling people seek you out as a friend and a trusted person, that's a sign that you're doing something right. Especially people who are not like you. How beneficial is it for another young white man to say, "Let's be friends"? Cool. I like that, and they're valuable as a person. But did I have to do any kind of extra work to understand what their life might be like?
Yeah.
We have way more in common, right? So it's easier for us to just kind of identify with each other's experiences. But now apply that to people who grew up completely different from you. Are you a person that they tend to trust? Are you a person that they approach or try to build relationships with? Because I think that we can be. I think that we can be the type of people that people want relationships with. It just takes a lot of work and a lot of self-analysis and the willingness to be wrong, the willingness to say, I don't know, I don't understand, I'm not here saying or pushing anything, but I am here because I genuinely want to learn and I genuinely like people.
Love that.
So the question of, how do people react to me is a good starting place as well.
Well, thanks so much for sharing, Kaleb. It's fantastic to hear your story. Tell us where we can connect with you, find this new documentary and all things Humans of Adventism.
Yeah, we have a brand new website, humansofadventism.com.
Okay.
That's kind of a great grouping of all the things.
Okay, yeah.
So you can find links to all of our episodes.
Yep.
They'll take you straight to YouTube where they're hosted. You can find the history, the people who work on this project. And you can also find, a couple of cool things that we sell. So we have a couple of different packs of conversation cards, for example.
Okay, I've seen those.
With 60 different questions that you can use in your small group or with your friends or whatever. But they're very driven toward deep conversation, life experiences that shaped you.
And
so
with the idea of getting other people to listen to other people.
Yeah. Yep. It's everybody needs a catalyst. We can't just sit down and be like, all right, share something deep. There has to be some kind of space created, and this is geared toward creating that space.
That's good.
It's an intentional move toward let's get to know each other at a deeper level.
Great. Humansofadventism.com. Well, thanks so much for your time today, Kaleb. Thanks for sharing your story.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks so much, Kaleb, for sharing with us. It's great to hear people's stories. What I loved about Kaleb's story is that he saw and still sees in his life today value in other people, right? And he got to know them. He gets to know them individually.
I think that there are so many people in this world who would love to be able to talk about their life story, and yet there are so few who actually want to take the time to hear you out.
Right. You can't get to know someone. You can't build community by telling them about yourself or your views, your political views, your religious views. It requires listening to their opinion too.
Conversation, back and forth, give and take.
Yeah.
And it really means that you have to know someone enough to, well, no, take that back. You don't have to even know someone that much. It's just having an attitude or a willingness, as Kaleb kind of talked about, to really hear people out. I'm reminded of the text in Revelation chapter 12, verse 11. It says that they have conquered him, the adversary, by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony. Storytelling is so powerful because literally the book of Revelation says, this is the way you win the war of life, by sharing your testimony, the ways God has worked in your life, the painful spaces, the good joys. This has a way of encouraging people into their chapter of darkness, hopelessness, hardship, trial, pain, and even joy. And so I think we miss out a lot by, not telling our own story, but then B, just not investing in hearing other people's stories in life. I can't tell you how many times hearing somebody's similar kind of difficult trial in life that has encouraged me. I remember, honestly, being a little kid in second grade, I was told, hey, you need to repeat school, buddy. You don't know English very well. This foreign kid. But, it got me on the start of just reading the life of Ben Carson.
Oh, yeah.
And he was kind of a troublemaker as a little kid. He almost hurt his buddy seriously. He was flunking out of school, doing terribly. And I was like, man, that's me. That's me. Hearing his story encouraged me as I realized, wow, he grew out of that. He not only grew out of it, he applied himself so much, he became a neurosurgeon. So for half my life growing up, I wanted to go into neurosurgery. This pastor wanted to work on the brain, but now I get to do it theologically.
There you go.
So, yeah.
Yeah, there's such a big power in listening. Well, check out what Kaleb is doing at humansofadventism.com. You can find the documentary series that's there and the merch that he mentioned as well. That's available on his website. You can connect with him that way. Let's finish with those couple of questions, Philip. Who are you afraid of? Who are you hesitant to interact with? When he threw that question out at us, that puts you in some difficult situations.
Oh, yeah. I think as a pastor, I find myself not wanting to have conversations with people where I haven't worked out what I believe about the issues.
Yeah.
It's like, man, I don't know what I'm going to tell them if they talk to me about this. So I think it's really important to think about this and then go at it.
Right.
Find those places and people that you are fearful of and deconstruct where did that fear come from. There might be something that God really wants to do in your life. That could be a person that might have hurt you. It could be a person who's just very different than you. It could be an individual that sees the world through a different lens.
Yeah. Question 2, how do people react to you in conversation and in life? Are your words and posture encouraging or discouraging others? So are you building bridges or building walls?
Wow.
Like we learned as kids, if it's not nice, don't say it. I remember learning that. That applies to actions as well.
Yeah.
And now as adults, are we paying attention to how people are actually responding to our words and actions?
That's good. That's good. I really appreciate this interview. And I hope that if you appreciate it as well, that you would share this with someone who you love and care for. Take the opportunity to click that subscribe button and pass on the joy. Well, as we always do, we want to share a blessing to you. So, Heavenly Father, speak into your people, speak words of life. And God, I pray that if there's anyone out there who's hurting right now, Lord, may they sit at your feet and hear what you have to say about them. And it is that they are loved, that they are chosen, that they are your beloved, that they are forgiven, that there is hope, that you have a purpose for their life, that there is light after a night of hardship. God, I pray the special blessing over everyone right now. In your name we pray, amen. And as we always say, today, choose to overflow.
Hey, thanks so much for listening in on our conversation today. If something we said made you think, or maybe you just want to say hello or give some feedback, we'd love to hear from you. You can send us an email at hello@choosetooverflow.com. You can find us on Instagram at choosetooverflow, or check out our website, choosetooverflow.com, where you can find more content, including a reflection guide for today's episode to help you take the conversation further. That's choosetooverflow.com. We also want to thank the Loma Linda University Church for their support of this project. And if this was helpful to you, please leave us a review, share with a friend or 3, and subscribe to stay connected. We'll be releasing new episodes every Monday. Thanks again for listening. We hope you choose to overflow this week. Let's chat again soon.